Magnum's got a hit on his hands. Tom Selleck. 1 year ago, I had the chance to meet this gentleman before he was a...
If you know anything about classic Hollywood cowboys, you know Tom Selleck and Sam Elliott stand at the very top. For over 50 years, fans watched these two icons star alongside each other in legendary westerns like the Sacketts and the Shadow Riders, assuming they were just rugged on-screen brothers with a friendly professional relationship. But behind their shared fame, thick mustaches and quiet cowboy personas lay a half-century of history that nobody saw coming. And after decades of remaining tight-lipped, Tom Selleck finally broke his silence to confess what really went on between them behind the camera. So, what did Tom Selleck actually reveal about Sam Elliott that caught the entire entertainment world off guard? Let's dive in. The Western movie that proved Tom Selleck and Sam Elliott were perfect together. There was something almost effortless about Tom Selleck and Sam Elliott whenever they shared the screen. But their second Western reunion would reveal just how much chemistry these two had built behind the scenes. By the time the Shadow Riders arrived in 1982, the two actors had already spent years establishing themselves as some of television's most recognizable Western stars. Yet, unlike many famous screen pairings, Selleck and Elliott never needed to force their connection. They simply looked like two men who understood exactly how to play off each other. And the Shadow Riders gave audiences another chance to see it. Their first major Western pairing came in 1979 with the Sacketts, an NBC miniseries based on Louis L'Amour's novels The Daybreakers and Sackett. Selleck, Elliott, and Jeff Osterhage played the Sackett brothers, three men who leave Tennessee and head west after tragedy changes the course of their lives. It was the kind of story perfectly suited to Selleck and Elliott, allowing both actors to settle into the rugged, larger-than-life characters that would become so closely associated with them. And the timing could hardly have been more interesting. Just 1 year after the Sacketts, Selleck would make his debut as Thomas Magnum in Magnum P.I., the role that would transform him into a household name. Suddenly, the actor who had been riding horses across Western landscapes was one of the biggest television stars in America. But despite his rapidly changing career, Selleck apparently had no problem returning to the saddle when another opportunity to work with Elliott came along. That opportunity was The Shadow Riders. Released as a CBS made-for-TV movie in 1982, the Western reunited Selleck and Elliott as brothers once again, this time in an entirely different story. Elliott played Dal Travin, a Confederate soldier who finds himself moments away from execution before his brother Mac, played by Selleck, arrives just in time to save him. And there was an obvious complication between them. Mac was serving as a Union officer, while Dal had fought for the Confederacy, creating the perfect setup for a bitter family conflict. But instead of allowing the war to permanently divide them, the brothers quickly put their differences aside when they discover that their family has been captured. Their relatives, along with Dal's girlfriend Kate, played by Catherine Ross, have fallen into the hands of Major Cooper Ashbury, a Comanchero leader portrayed by Jeffrey Lewis. Suddenly, the brothers have something far more important to worry about than which side they fought for. So Mac and Dal set off on a dangerous rescue mission, joined by their uncle, Blackjack Travin, played by Western legend Ben Johnson. And this is where The Shadow Riders becomes especially interesting, because beneath the familiar Western revenge and rescue story was the real reason audiences kept watching: Selleck and Elliott together. Their chemistry was impossible to miss. There was a relaxed quality between them that made their scenes feel less like two actors performing opposite one another and more like two men who already knew exactly where the other was going. Even when the movie became a little ridiculous, the pair somehow kept it entertaining. One scene captures that perfectly. Mac rides in to save Dal from a hanging, points his pistol at a crowd of fully armed soldiers, and simply orders them to lower their weapons. Somehow, they listen. It's the kind of moment that could easily have destroyed the tension, yet Elliott's knowing smirk almost seems to acknowledge just how wonderfully over the top the whole thing is. And perhaps that was the secret of The Shadow Riders. It was never destined to become one of the greatest westerns ever made. Directed by Andrew McLaglen, who had already built a reputation directing westerns and working with John Wayne, the movie was a fairly straightforward television adventure, complete with jaunty country and western music that sometimes undercut the seriousness of the story. Still, audiences had Selleck and Elliot. That alone gave the movie something many forgettable westerns of the era never had. The two actors brought a natural confidence to their roles, and because they had already worked together in the Sacketts, their reunion felt familiar without becoming repetitive. Their characters could argue, joke, fight, and ride into danger, yet there was always an underlying sense that these two belonged on the same screen. And while the Shadow Riders eventually faded into the long list of overlooked television westerns, that chemistry never really disappeared. For fans looking back decades later, the movie offers something far more interesting than its simple plot. A snapshot of two legendary actors early in their careers before both would become permanently associated with the cowboy image audiences still recognize today. Before Tom Selleck became a cowboy icon, his life was heading somewhere completely different. Long before Tom Selleck became one of Hollywood's most recognizable faces, complete with the mustache, deep voice, and commanding presence that would eventually make him feel almost born for the Western genre, his path to stardom looked very different. And what makes his story even more surprising is that the man who would eventually become one of America's most recognizable leading men was not originally planning to become an actor at all. Born Thomas William Selleck in Detroit, Michigan in 1945, Selleck grew up in a family that would eventually move to Los Angeles, where his life began taking a series of unexpected turns. After graduating from high school, Selleck enrolled at Los Angeles Valley College while living at home and saving money. He was already an impressive athlete, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, and his height and ability eventually earned him a place playing basketball at the University of Southern California. He also played baseball, giving him more than one possible path before acting ever entered the picture. Then, almost by accident, everything changed. While studying business administration, a drama coach suggested that Selleck try acting. It was a small piece of advice, but it introduced him to a completely different world. Before long, he left university and began studying acting at the Beverly Hills Playhouse under respected acting teacher Milton Katselas. What started as an unexpected suggestion was slowly turning into a serious pursuit, but Hollywood did not immediately welcome him with open arms. Selleck spent years taking whatever opportunities came his way, appearing in commercials, television programs, and smaller film roles while trying to establish himself. There was no instant transformation into the star audiences would eventually recognize. For years, he was simply another young actor trying to find the one role that could finally give his career the push it needed. And then came another unexpected chapter. During the Vietnam War era, Selleck received a draft notice and enlisted in the California Army National Guard. He served from 1967 to 1973, eventually reaching the rank of sergeant. By the time he returned his attention fully to acting, he had experienced something far removed from the glamorous image of Hollywood that audiences would later associate with him. Still, the acting career he had started building before his military service was waiting for him. Selleck continued working, gradually becoming more recognizable through television appearances and commercial work. He was learning how to command attention even when he was not the main attraction, and that experience would eventually become important because his greatest strength was never simply his appearance. It was the calm confidence he brought into a room. That quality became especially useful when he started moving toward leading man roles. Selleck had always been drawn to the outdoors and was an experienced marksman, and those interests happened to complement the kind of rugged characters Hollywood was beginning to see in him. He had the height, the physical presence, and the quiet confidence that could make audiences believe he belonged in a completely different era. Then, in 1979, his career took a major step forward with the Sacketts, a Western adaptation of Louis L'Amour's work. Selleck played Orrin Sackett, giving audiences their first real glimpse of the kind of commanding Western hero he could become. It was an important moment because suddenly, the actor who had spent years fighting for recognition looked completely comfortable as a cowboy. But just as Selleck was beginning to establish that identity, something much bigger was waiting around the corner. In 1980, he landed the role that would change his career forever. Thomas Magnum was a former Navy officer turned private investigator living in Hawaii, and on paper, the character could have gone in countless directions. Selleck, however, gave Magnum a combination of confidence, humor, toughness, and charm that quickly made the character his own. Magnum P.I. became a phenomenon. The show ran for 8 seasons and turned Selleck into a household name. His mustache became iconic. His Hawaiian shirts became instantly recognizable. Even the red Ferrari he drove around Hawaii became part of the character's image. But beneath all of that was something even more important. Selleck had finally found the role that proved he could carry a major television series. The success also created one of Hollywood's great what-ifs. Selleck had been offered the opportunity to play Indiana Jones in Raiders of the Lost Ark, but his commitment to Magnum P.I. prevented him from taking the part. The production schedule would not allow him to leave the series, so the role ultimately went to Harrison Ford. It was a huge opportunity that slipped away, but Selleck's career hardly suffered because of it. Instead, Magnum P.I. gave him the kind of visibility that opened doors across Hollywood. He began taking on more substantial film roles while continuing to build his reputation as a leading man. And rather than allowing himself to be defined by a single character, Selleck gradually showed audiences that there was much more to him than the Hawaiian shirt, the Ferrari, and the famous mustache. By the end of the 1980s, he had gone from a young actor struggling to get noticed to one of the most recognizable stars on television and in Hollywood. And perhaps the most interesting part was that his career still had plenty of unexpected turns left in it. Tom Selleck's secret wedding and the marriage that lasted decades. For all the fame Tom Selleck has collected over the decades, some of the most interesting chapters of his life happened far away from cameras and movie sets. Behind the famous mustache, the cowboy roles, and the larger-than-life image was a man whose personal life went through a very different journey, including an early marriage that quietly came to an end and a second relationship that would eventually become one of Hollywood's longest-lasting love stories. And while Selleck has always been famously private about his family, the story of his two marriages reveals a side of the actor that audiences rarely get to see. Before Jillie Mack entered his life, Selleck was married to actress and model Jacqueline Ray. The two married in May 1971 when Selleck was 26 and Ray was 18. At the time, Selleck was still years away from becoming the household name he would eventually become, meaning their relationship began long before the world knew him as Thomas Magnum. Ray had already worked in entertainment, appearing in films and television productions during the 1960s and 1970s. She was also a mother to a young son named Kevin when she married Selleck. Selleck eventually adopted Kevin, and that decision would become one of the more important parts of their family story. The marriage itself remained largely out of the public eye. Unlike the celebrity relationships that dominate headlines today, Selleck and Ray did not spend their lives constantly explaining their private affairs to the public. Very little was publicly known about what happened inside their marriage, but after roughly 11 years together, the relationship eventually came to an end. Their divorce was finalized in 1982. And that timing is especially interesting because Selleck's professional life was about to explode. By then, Magnum P.I. had arrived, transforming him from a familiar working actor into one of television's biggest stars. His face was suddenly everywhere, and the private life he had once been able to keep relatively quiet was now inevitably connected to his growing fame. Yet, despite the divorce, there does not appear to have been the kind of public hostility that often surrounds celebrity breakups. In fact, one detail makes that especially clear. Ray appeared on Magnum P.I. during Selleck's rise to fame, first in 1981 and again in 1983. The fact that the former couple could share a television set after their marriage had ended suggested that whatever had happened between them, they were not interested in turning their private history into a public spectacle. Selleck's relationship with his former stepson Kevin also continued. Kevin eventually pursued a career in entertainment himself, becoming an actor and musician. He appeared on Magnum P.I. and later became the drummer for the rock band Tonic during the 1990s. In other words, even though Selleck's first marriage had ended, the family connections created during those years did not simply disappear. But then came the woman who would completely change the next chapter of Selleck's life. In the early 1980s, Selleck was in London while working on Lassiter, and that was where he encountered Jillie Mack. Mack was a British West End performer who was appearing in the hugely popular musical Cats, playing Rumpel-Teazer. Selleck became fascinated with the production, but apparently there was one particular reason he kept coming back: Jillie. He reportedly watched Cats 8 times, with one account putting the number at 8.5. His interest in the show became so obvious that even his co-star Jane Seymour noticed. Seymour later recalled Selleck repeatedly talking about how good Cats was, while she could not understand why anyone would keep returning to the same musical so many times. Mack, however, apparently had no idea why this American actor kept looking in her direction. When another cast member pointed out that Selleck seemed interested in her, Mack reportedly responded with little concern for his celebrity status. To her, he was apparently just some man sitting in the audience. That may have been exactly what attracted Selleck. Eventually, the two went out for dinner, and what began with Selleck watching a West End musical over and over gradually turned into a relationship that would last for decades. Once Mack's contract with Katz ended, she moved to the United States, and the relationship continued to grow. Unlike the whirlwind celebrity romances that often burn brightly and disappear just as quickly, Selleck and Mack built something much quieter. By 1985, their relationship had become serious enough that Selleck invited Mack to accompany him to a state dinner at the White House, hosted by President Ronald Reagan and First Lady Nancy Reagan. That particular evening became famous for another reason. John Travolta famously danced with Princess Diana, creating one of the most memorable photographs of the decade. But Selleck also found himself sharing the dance floor with the princess after reportedly being invited by Diana herself. Mack, meanwhile, danced with Prince Charles. It was an extraordinary evening for a couple who had begun their relationship in a much less glamorous setting, with Selleck repeatedly watching a musical because he could not stop noticing the woman performing in it. 2 years later, they made their relationship permanent. On August 7, 1987, Selleck and Mack secretly married at a chapel near Lake Tahoe, Nevada. The wedding was deliberately kept away from the press, with the couple and their small group of guests reportedly using fake names to prevent anyone from discovering what was happening. The minister had been expecting a couple named Tom Jenkins and Susie Mark. Instead, Tom Selleck and Jillie Mack walked through the door. It was exactly the kind of wedding that suited Selleck's personality. At a time when his fame was enormous and photographers were constantly interested in his private life, he chose to make one of the biggest moments of his life as quiet as possible. Then came another major change. On December 16, 1988, Selleck and Mack welcomed their daughter, Hannah. The arrival of their daughter gradually shifted Selleck's priorities. Rather than allowing Hollywood to dictate every part of his life, the couple chose to create a quieter family environment. They eventually raised Hannah on a secluded 65-acre ranch in Ventura County, California, where she grew up around horses and developed a passion for equestrian competition. That passion eventually became a career of its own. Hannah went on to become a highly accomplished equestrian and established Descanso Farm, focusing on developing horses and helping advance their competitive careers. For Selleck and Mack, watching their daughter build a life around something she genuinely loved became another important chapter in their family story. And perhaps that is what makes Selleck's second marriage so fascinating. Hollywood gave him fame, money, unforgettable characters, and a career that lasted for generations. But away from the cameras, he seemed to want something much simpler: a private home, a family, a place where his daughter could grow up away from the constant attention surrounding her father. Even Mack, despite stepping away from the spotlight for much of her life, occasionally appeared alongside Selleck on Magnum P.I., giving fans a glimpse of the woman who had become such an important part of his world. From his first marriage to Jacqueline Ray, the adoption of Kevin, and a divorce that unfolded quietly, to the unexpected meeting with Jillie Mack that eventually led to a secret wedding and a family of their own, Selleck's personal life followed a path almost as unexpected as his acting career. And after decades together, the relationship that began with a West End dancer and an actor who could not stop returning to Katz became the part of Selleck's life that seemed to matter most when the cameras were finally turned off. What happened to Tom Selleck after Blue Bloods came to an end? For 14 years, Tom Selleck had something many actors spend their entire careers searching for: a role that became almost inseparable from his identity. As Frank Reagan on Blue Bloods, Selleck became the calm, commanding face of one of television's most beloved police dramas, leading the Reagan family through countless cases, arguments, victories, and losses. But when the long-running series finally came to an end in 2024, it left behind a much bigger question about what would come next for its star. And according to reports, one person who has been especially concerned about Selleck during this transition is his longtime friend, Sam Elliott. After 14 seasons and more than a decade on CBS, Blue Bloods reached its final episode in December 2024. The network decided to bring the series to a close, ending a remarkable run that had kept Selleck in the role of Frank Reagan since 2010. For the actor, this was not simply another television show reaching the end of its run. Frank Reagan had become one of the defining roles of the later part of Selleck's career. Every season brought him back to the same world, the same family, and the same familiar Sunday dinner table where the Reagans would gather and debate everything from police work to family problems. For millions of viewers, that routine became part of television itself. Then suddenly, it was over. Selleck had already expressed his disappointment about the decision, particularly because he believed the series still had more stories to tell. He had spent years watching the show remain popular with audiences, making its conclusion feel like the end of something that still had plenty of momentum. And that is where the reports surrounding Sam Elliott become particularly interesting. The two actors have known each other for decades, going all the way back to their Western collaborations in the Sacketts and the Shadow Riders. Long before Selleck became Frank Reagan, and before Elliott became one of the most recognizable voices and faces in modern Westerns, the two had already established a friendship. Now, according to reports, Elliott has been trying to reconnect with his old friend and help him adjust to life after Blue Bloods. That concern reportedly comes from Elliott's own understanding of how unpredictable an acting career can be. In a previous interview, Elliott spoke about periods in his career when he found himself waiting for the phone to ring, describing rejection as one of the frustrating realities of the entertainment business. For an actor who has worked for decades, those quiet periods are not unusual, but that does not necessarily make them easier. And Selleck is now facing a version of that uncertainty after spending 14 years in one of the most stable roles of his career. Reports have claimed that Selleck has been struggling to adjust to the show's ending, with one source describing him as being in the dumps. Another claim suggested that Elliott wants to encourage him to become more active again and possibly even work out together. The idea is simple: get Selleck out of the house, get him moving, give him something to focus on. And perhaps most importantly, remind him that his career does not have to be defined by the ending of one television series. Still, some of the more dramatic claims about Selleck's health should be treated carefully because they have not been independently established. What is clear, however, is that the end of Blue Bloods represented a significant transition after such a long commitment, and that kind of transition can be strange. For more than a decade, Selleck had a routine built around the show. There were scripts to learn, scenes to shoot, cast members to work with, and an entire production waiting for him to step into Frank Reagan's shoes. When a series runs for 14 seasons, it becomes more than a job. It becomes part of the rhythm of everyday life. Suddenly removing that rhythm leaves a lot of empty space. Elliott, perhaps more than most people, understands what that feels like. His own career was not a straight line from one successful role to another. He experienced the uncertainty that comes with being an actor, including periods when opportunities were scarce and the next job was impossible to predict. That may explain why the reported concern is less about finding Selleck another major role and more about helping him regain his momentum. Sometimes, after spending years working toward the next production, the hardest part is figuring out what to do when there is no production waiting. And Elliott's reported approach seems to be remarkably simple: be there. Whether that means meeting at the gym, spending time together, talking about the business, or simply getting Selleck out of his routine, the point would be to help his longtime friend move forward rather than remain stuck thinking about what has already ended. There is also something fitting about Elliott being the person reaching out. Their friendship stretches back to a period when both men were still building their careers. They experienced Hollywood before either had become the household names audiences would eventually recognize. They know what rejection feels like, what uncertainty feels like, and what it means to wait for the next opportunity. So while the end of Blue Bloods may have closed one of the longest chapters of Tom Selleck's career, it does not necessarily mean the story has reached its final page. Perhaps that is what Sam Elliott is trying to remind him of. Because after 14 years as Frank Reagan, Selleck may simply need some time to figure out who Tom Selleck is when there is no badge, no script, and no camera waiting for him. And if the reports are true, he has at least one old friend who intends to make sure he does not figure that out alone. Tom Selleck finally reveals the truth about his friendship with Sam Elliott. For decades, Tom Selleck and Sam Elliott have shared something that is surprisingly rare in Hollywood, a friendship that survived changing careers, different paths, and more than half a century in the entertainment business. But while audiences had seen the two men work together, very little was known about what their relationship was actually like away from the cameras. That changed when Selleck finally opened up about Elliot in his memoir, revealing that their friendship goes back much further than their famous Western collaborations. When Selleck finally agreed to write his memoir, he admitted that it took some convincing. He had spent most of his career keeping his private life private, and the idea of putting his personal experiences into a book did not immediately appeal to him. His publicist reportedly kept encouraging him for years before he finally decided to sit down and start writing. And once he did, Selleck discovered that he had far more stories to tell than he initially expected. Rather than turning the book into a tell-all filled with Hollywood gossip, Selleck chose a conversational approach. He wanted to speak not only to longtime fans, but also to young actors and people trying to find their way through the entertainment industry. Along the way, he shared lessons he had picked up during more than 5 decades in the business. One of the most personal parts of the memoir, however, involved the friendship that had been there almost from the beginning. Sam Elliott. According to Selleck, their friendship dates back to the 1960s, long before the Sacketts, the Shadow Riders, or either man had become strongly associated with the Western genre. Selleck remembered Elliot as a lanky young man with a deep voice who already seemed to understand exactly who he was and what he wanted to become. That detail says a lot about the way Selleck viewed his friend. He did not simply remember Elliot as another struggling actor trying to break into Hollywood. He remembered someone who seemed unusually certain of himself, someone who already appeared more formed even during those early years. And that early impression clearly stayed with him. The two men continued building their careers before eventually finding themselves working together on the Sacketts in 1979. By then, Selleck was beginning to establish himself as a leading man, while Elliot was developing the distinctive screen presence that would later make him one of the most recognizable actors in Westerns. Their partnership continued with the Shadow Riders in 1982, but according to Selleck's memoir, the friendship itself was much bigger than those two productions. That may be what makes his comments about Elliot so interesting. Selleck's memories are not simply about another actor he happened to work with. They are about someone who had been part of his life since the earliest stages of his career, long before the fame, awards, iconic characters, and Hollywood recognition. And the Western genre became an important part of that shared history. Selleck explained that working on the Sacketts completely changed the way he viewed Westerns. He became fascinated by the freedom of the genre, particularly the way horses, open land, and unpredictable surroundings could bring a sense of spontaneity to a performance. That experience eventually influenced his own life, helping inspire his dream of having a ranch with land and horses. But even when Selleck talked about the Western genre itself, he still recognized Elliot's importance to keeping that tradition alive. He later credited Elliot, along with Kevin Costner and a handful of other actors, with helping keep Westerns relevant for new generations. It was a fitting acknowledgement from someone whose own career had become closely connected to the genre. Yet underneath all of that was something much simpler. Selleck had known Elliot since they were young actors, trying to find their place in Hollywood. They watched each other's careers evolve, crossed paths professionally, and remained friends long after those early days had passed. And perhaps that is the biggest revelation in Selleck's memoir. The friendship audiences associate with two famous Western stars did not begin on horseback. It began decades earlier, when neither man could have known just how far their careers would eventually take them. Were you a fan of Tom Selleck and Sam Elliott in Shadow Riders? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, click the next video shown in your screen. You will enjoy it.